The title of my talk is An Extremely Intellectual Crisis. Now, crisis is a word that describes a very specific moment in a serious illness. It is the moment at which the fever is at a pitch. The patient will either die if the fever persists, or survive if it breaks. Crises in the medical world they come from are very slippery, undecided, and anxious moments just before the future is determined by the course of events. And now we have that word, an intellectual crisis. To be very honest, it has something of the spoilt child about it. It rarely describes a live or die moment. Rather, it describes a "I am bored, what shall we do now" kind of moment, resulting in the intellectual invariably putting his head in the sand. Now, why does he do this? The reason, I think, has at least two ingredients to it and a particular way of mixing them. Firstly, an intellectual crisis emerges at the moment when a failure of something or other is being signalled. In this way, we have the failures of historicism, of modernity, of postmodernity, but also of communism, of socialism, perhaps even of capitalism, of Europe, of the euro. The tragedy of intellectualism is that these failures do not in fact describe any failure of the word they use. If they describe anything observable at all, they describe the failure of us human beings to stop cheating, subverting, abusing the very systems to whom we like to devolve our responsibility, or whose restrictive climate we are often understandably trying to avoid and subvert. So modernity failed. Well, if modernity was anything at all, it failed because we almost immediately made a mess of it. Many of its actors and many of those affected by it didn't really want it to succeed in the first place. Socialism failed for the same reason. Capitalism is turning into a free-for-all because we are making a mess of it. We cheat, subvert, abuse, misuse everything other people dream up. If you need an explanation for that, you might call it our nature. And I hope that'll teach you to ask for an explanation, because of course it isn't one. That brings me to the second ingredient of every intellectual crisis. You see, an intellectual crisis is a careful construction to make us charge at windmills like Don Quixote did. It is not that I'm saying that it is we who are wrong with us. It is just that we're not very good at obeying grand schemes and restrictive strategies. Mankind, whatever that is, as the great Dadaist Dr. Walter Serner wrote in 1917 during a period of humanity's greatest failing, wrote, "Man is too weak to be really good, too good to be really bad. He is weak, and in consequence, rather base." That was his cynical view, a view that was understandable perhaps during the First World War, and a very filthy First War it was. But not all of us are base, even though most of us do base things occasionally. but we're also capable of truly wonderful behavior. Intellectual crises then come and go, but I, for one, find them less and less interesting as tools for intellectual discourse. They are essentially a case of mauvaise foi, an attempt to blame the operating instructions rather than your own incompetence when faced with an IKEA package. It is for this reason that I'm highly skeptical of all grand panoramic descriptions of historical development. The reality of each intellectual crisis depends heavily upon the fictions that guide them, our fictions. What I find much more interesting is to ask myself and others this question: why do we keep on making a mess of things? I think you've had two rather good answers here already. But then, who judges things to be a mess in the first place? And that makes me suspicious. And on what grounds does this person judge things to be a mess? To what depth of human misery are we ready to sink as good people in order to realize our fictions or to respond to this or that confabulated crisis? And when will we start to learn to negotiate the link between the way we talk and what we do? For tonight, how many minutes have I got? 5, thanks. For tonight, the speaker, our hosts presented us with a fourfold crisis. We were sent a little list. There was supposedly the theory of the crisis of theory versus practice, of privileging market theory over a reliance upon the humanities, of privileging form over function or vice versa, but that crisis was later taken out. And there was the crisis of the architect versus the architect as director versus the architect as expert. So, 4 slippery choices, one of them presumably leading to the good and the other presumably leading to the bad. And I shall deal with as many of them as I can within the time that I have left. First of all, the crisis with regard to theory versus practice. This crisis, this opposition between theory and practice, merely reveals our confusion, I think. Let's begin by going over seemingly familiar territory so that we get the relations between things right, in such a way that we at least have something to talk about. So here goes. Rule number 1, practice is just about doing things, and it's about nothing more. Rule number 2, the ideas you might have about doing things, the kind of things you might want to do, and the kind of ideas you might have about getting them right, that's what we shall call theory. And rule number 3, philosophy shall be that discipline that thinks about them both constantly. Philosophy is the thinking of theory and practice. And that's what Alain Badiou said, and I think he got that just about right. So we might have a theory of fair design or a theory of sustainable design, and then practice will try to accommodate our wishes and our ways of going about things by making those wishes come true. And the role of philosophy then is to check things and make sure that everything is in place at every stage of the way. Really, the relationship between those 3 is that simple, or could be that simple. Now, theory has a bad name in some quarters, and that's always confused me. There are people who say, well, we talk and talk, but we should be doing things. So, people who talk the whole time without doing what they talk about give talking a bad name. But if you think about it, it should be the other way around. It should be their doing that is the problem. After all, they're not doing anything. It's not so much their talking that's the problem, it's the bloody fact that they don't get on with it. Alternatively, there are people who... Oh, is that my 5 minutes? I'm nearly ready. One more minute. Alternatively, there are people who do stupid and horrible things because they hold very silly ideas, and they give practice a bad name, while it is in fact their theory that is the problem. No one escapes doing things, no one escapes having ideas about what they do, and so we all relate theory to practice and vice versa. There is, however, a strange breed of architects who say, well, you know, I'm a practical man. I don't do theory. We all know them, we've all met them, and we've all perhaps even liked them. Well, like young puppies that have made a mess on the carpet, we should take their ears and push their noses into the mess they've made, because everybody does theory. Those whose theory is that they do not do theory quite simply have a rather shabby thought about what theory means to them. And they pretend to a kind of anti-intellectualism, which is merely pretentious and snobbish in an inverse sort of way. And that is quite the worst kind of snobbishness. Thank you very much.